Good morning, everyone. This is Caprice Murray from Tensoft. We're going to get started now. You're attending Structuring Software Sales Transactions for Optimal Revenue Recognition, sponsored by Tensoft. Our presenter today is Jeffrey Werner from Werner Consulting Group. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Next slide, please, Jeffrey. Okay. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started, and I turn it over to Bob Scarborough of Tensoft to kick it off. We do recommend that you view the webcast full screen. We also recommend that you turn off any other applications. The number one issue that we run into with attendees is if you have insufficient bandwidth because of other applications running, sometimes you'll experience some problems. Also, you can submit questions anytime using the questions panel over to your right. Go ahead and type in your question, and we'll be answering those while Jeffrey is while we have the breaks for the polls. Jeffrey will answer questions then, and afterwards he'll be answering as many as he has time for, and then we'll follow up with any afterwards via email. So please do get those in. Those are interesting usually, and then you get some real value out of this. CPE certificates, we will be emailing those to everyone who meets the eligibility requirements by the end of business on Friday, this Friday. So look for those in your email, and we'll get those out to you. And then if you do have any questions that come up after the webcast, please do feel free to shoot an email to either Jeffrey or myself, and we'll get you an answer to those. So now I'm going to turn the audio over to Bob Scarborough, who is Tensoft's president and co-founder. Bob, take it away. Oh, Bob, I think you probably want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Caprice. I believe I got it. So thank you, Caprice, and welcome, everyone. Pleased that you could be here. And just a couple quick slides on us as a sponsor, and kind of a background about why we are interested in this topic, just like you. And then pleased to introduce Jeffrey Werner. So Tensoft is we're a business software provider, and we focus on technology companies. And we have software that does revenue recognition management, from high velocity, simple transactions to more complex multi-element arrangements. And so we do have a complete revenue management suite. We support certain contract billing scenarios. We have some understanding of business model flow and basically how to put a system into your environment that helps make revenue more visible, keeps it compliant with the appropriate GAAP requirements, and helps make your team more productive and scalable. Next slide, please. So for us, the sales transaction in terms of revenue management is really capturing two things, and Jeffrey's going to focus a lot on the sales transaction today and its impact on revenue. The first one is really capturing the right sale for revenue recognition purposes, especially related to multi-element arrangements. And then we create a revenue agreement in our system, or our philosophy, and put workflow, rules, fair value allocation around that process. And so we're really trying to add a systematic, controlled way to recognize revenue based on however you go to market and whatever your revenue recognition requirements are. So next slide, please. And this is a visual way to look at that, where the left-hand side talks about your sales transaction may occur in your CRM system or on your website. It may come from our billing management or our contract management system. It may come from your ERP system. And whatever the source, we have a methodology to pull in the transaction with the appropriate technology and then put it into consistent revenue agreement creation by workflow, fair value allocation, revenue rules application, moving it into the revenue subledger where we do compute, post, report. And then that handles your revenue reporting, subledger, ERP journal entry. So enough about us, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm pleased today to introduce Jeffrey Werner, and we've been working with Jeffrey for a while, and it really is a privilege. He's an acknowledged expert in the area of software revenue recognition. He's been providing revenue recognition consulting to software and technology companies since 2001. Prior to launching his consulting business, Jeffrey was the CFO of Antrim Design Systems, a mixed signal synthesis company here in Silicon Valley. Before that, he was VP of Finance for Telepost, a web-based communication services company based in Santa Cruz. And earlier in his career, Jeffrey spent 11 years with KPMG Silicon Valley office, where he was a senior manager. Jeffrey regularly teaches software revenue recognition classes in the San Francisco Bay Area. He has over 15 years experience helping companies comply with revenue recognition regulations through policies and best practices. So, Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone to today's webcast. Just a little follow on what Bob was talking about, the Werner Consulting Group and the revenue recognition services that I provide in addition to training classes like this and webcasts. Do a lot of work with technology companies in the Bay Area, worked with over 100 companies over the last few years, providing contract review, analysis and accounting advice, VSOE studies, technical research, and outsourced revenue management. And in addition, I want to highlight that with the new revenue standard, working with companies to understand the impact of the new standard, to do that analysis and train their teams to deal with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also want to mention that we have a revenue recognition for technology companies webcast coming up. It's a two-part, two half-day, so it's a 7-hour class over a Tuesday and Thursday morning, Pacific Daylight Time. There is CPE credit for that, and it's a pay per attendance. If you're on our email list, you probably received an email, I think this week, about the registration for that, or you can go to the Tensoft website for more details. The outline of what we present in that class is a discussion of the general principles of revenue recognition, how to address the accounting for multiple element arrangements, VSOE, software revenue recognition, and services and contract accounting. That takes up the first half-day session in day one. And in day two, we review again the general principles. We talk about service and contract accounting, the revenue recognition methodology, the relative selling price method. We talk about SaaS or cloud computing, the FASB ISB revenue project, and other revenue recognition issues and topics. And again, that's coming up in May if you'd like to register for that. Our outline for today, we've completed the introduction. We'll look at some of the optimal revenue recognition ideas, what companies like to do, the various business models and the desired outcomes. We'll talk about the residual method of software revenue recognition and the importance of VSOE. Look at some of the significant contract terms, the troublesome issues that companies have with their software revenue recognition, services and software, and then look at software in combination with other elements. We'll also just highlight briefly the new revenue standard for you. And again, as we mentioned, if you have any questions as we go along, you're welcome to use the question chat function, I guess the question and answer function in the GoToWebinar presentation system, and we'll be happy to look at those as we go along. If they're on topic, try to answer them as we go or during one of the breaks for the polling questions or at the end. If you have a question we don't get to or that you don't ask, you can email that to us, as Capri said, and we'll respond with email responses. And we'll also consolidate all the questions from the webcast and put them on our blog with the questions and the answers. So please do present any of the questions or issues that you have during the webcast. We really enjoy that feedback as we go along. And I think we'll take our first polling question now to make sure that's working and to be certain that you get your CPE credit for today's webcast. our first question is, do you want to receive CPE credit for attending today's training? That would be yes or no, I think would be your possible answers. And we'll keep that open for a second. Haven't had any questions come in yet. And again, the focus of today's webinar is software sales. We do present other revenue recognition topics on these complimentary 1-hour webcasts, and we do have a couple times a year where we do the in-depth 2-day, 2 half-day revenue recognition for technology companies webcast. So how are we doing there? Did we get pretty good? We're done? Okay. So thank you. And you know, different companies have different objectives and different business models that they want to facilitate in their revenue recognition policies and the way they structure their transactions. Some companies like maximum upfront revenue recognition and use the license methodology with support and have VSOE for that so that they can recognize the licenses on delivery and the support or other services as they're provided. Other companies like to have ratable revenue recognition. Maybe they use the SaaS or the subscription model for their sales transactions, and some like the flexibility of having both or multiple types of business models and revenue recognition contracts in order to achieve their goals. As far as best practices with regards to how to structure your software revenue recognition transactions, I think one of the primary ones is to have knowledgeable revenue and sales teams, and this it means getting experienced personnel, going with ongoing training such as this and other webinars, research classes to support the knowledge base within your company. And more importantly than just having that resident in the revenue team is to work with the sales and operations teams so that they understand the significant issues with regards to software revenue recognition, and that allows them to present the best possible ways of structuring the transactions that still meet the customer's needs, but also meet the company's needs for the way they would like to recognize revenue. Standardized contracts go a long way towards helping that, because then once you've developed a good standard contract that meets your revenue recognition needs, and if you are able to use that contract for your transactions, you only have to look at the new elements that you introduce or the changes to that contract in order to have solid basis for your revenue recognition. And then a real key business practice is to have a revenue deal desk that does the pre-deal reviews with the sales team prior to the negotiation with the customer and during the negotiation process with the customer. Because again, lots of times there's a contract term that a customer might request that could be worded or structured 2 different ways to achieve the same goal that could have 2 very different revenue recognition outcomes for the company. And now, as we've been moving along for the past 4 or 5 years with the relative selling price method, it's my experience that the knowledge of software revenue recognition is not as well known or as predominant as it once was, because it was pervasive and was applying to lots of transactions that weren't just software sales. But software does have unique characteristics to it that over time, with the body of literature that's come up, could be very restrictive on revenue recognition. And we'll get into some of those issues with regards to that. The business models, as we mentioned, perpetual licenses with support and services. These can be structured so that the license revenue is recognized up front and the support and the services revenue recognized separately as those services and the support is being provided. As long as you have, as we'll see later, VSOE for those undelivered services. Term licenses, you can have both term licenses with and without support In some cases, you can recognize those license revenue up front, just like a perpetual license. In other cases, you'll be recognizing the revenue ratably over the term of the license. It's going to depend again on the length of the term license and whether you have the ability to establish VSOE for the support component to those term licenses. In general, if your term licenses are 1 year or less, you're not going to have that flexibility, but you can have that flexibility with longer term licenses as long as the support periods are 1 year or other periods that work with establishing VSOE. Other companies, excuse me, like the subscription business model. This is a model that provides for ratable revenue recognition over the subscription period and provides the customer with a buffet or smorgasbord of options over that subscription period, such that you can either swap in and out, or that additional offerings that become available also are included in that subscription. And again, this results in a ratable revenue recognition over the subscription period. Lots of companies find that there's a premium in the marketplace valuation-wise for companies that have steady revenue that's predictable, and that comes from the ratable revenue recognition methodologies of the subscription and the cloud software as a service or SaaS model. So cloud software as a service really doesn't fall under the software revenue recognition rules or business models, because it's not sale or licensing of a software program. It is a service that's provided typically over the web. But we'll take a look at how we do the accounting for that as well briefly as part of this webcast. We really only have an hour, and it is quite an in-depth topic. We spend 2-3 hours on it in the full-day course that we present. What to do when you're looking at your transactions and you'd like to understand how you account for them. And the first step really is to determine which set of rules that you're going to be governed by when you do your revenue recognition. Are you going to be under the software revenue recognition with the residual method, or are you going to be following services revenue recognition if you're a SaaS or cloud model? And that's going to be using the relative selling price method, which is the method that's been in use for the last 4 or 5 years now, primarily for companies that have tangible products or other items that they're selling that are not software. But if you are doing software, you've got a license. When you deliver the software, you need to determine whether you can recognize that license up front or have to recognize it over time using the residual method of revenue recognition. The real keys of what to do to get optimal revenue recognition on a software transaction is to have clear and understandable contract terms. That's really assisted by having a standard contract that you begin with and add clauses and terms to. You need to have clear pricing. If you're looking for to establish VSOE, particularly for your services and your support offerings, you need to have consistent pricing, and that sometimes requires significant sales discipline to not discount or sell those items for too wide a range of prices. You need to have practices that establish and maintain VSOE. So besides consistent pricing, if you have renewal language, you need to follow those renewal terms as part of your VSOE establishment, particularly when you sell other services, whether it's the support and maintenance or consulting or training type services. When you sell those as standalone transactions and use those data points to establish VSOE, you need to have consistent pricing, or you can run into difficulty establishing VSOE. I think that most companies find if they price support as a percentage of the net license fee, they're going to find it much easier to maintain consistent pricing relative to the net license fee and facilitate establishing VSOE. If you do your pricing of support as a percentage of your list price or some other price, sometimes it can be very difficult to maintain that, because if you deeply discount the licenses, the cost of the support in a very short period of time approaches the total value of the software license. And then again, understanding the revenue recognition rules that are applying to your transaction and having that be knowledge within both your sales and your revenue teams is critical. And reviewing deals before you sign them, so you make sure that if there is a troublesome term, you can do your very best to try and mitigate any negative impacts of those terms. Things to avoid, kind of the flip side, unclear contract terms. It may surprise you. It's surprised me the number of times that I've worked with companies to review executed contracts that don't have all the terms of the agreement in place, have unclear contract terms, even such things as what is the date the agreement was signed and when it becomes effective. Sometimes are unclear. You can see that because a lot of contracts have a blank for the date, and if that's not filled in when the contract's executed, it's really difficult to determine when that contract came into effect and how long it might last for. Any unclear pricing terms that are unclear because they're variable pricing or because the discounts are calculated in unusual or complicated manners. If you're not able to develop the discipline and to establish VSOE, that can certainly impact your ability to get optimal revenue recognition from your software transactions, because you need VSOE in order to defer the undelivered elements and recognize the residual amount for the delivered elements. And then, again, pricing support as a percentage of list can be problematic. Any future obligations that you might have that you don't have VSOE for are going to not only maybe preclude upfront revenue recognition, but might preclude revenue recognition until those obligations have been met. Sometimes that's quite a distance in the future from when you enter into the contract or you make the first deliveries. And I think now would be a good time for our second polling question, and also take a look and see if we have any questions that have come in. And so our second polling question is, does your company consider to be an optimal, what does your company consider to be optimal revenue recognition for your licenses? License revenue on delivery, ratable, some kind of combination, or would you like to get revenue before you deliver your licenses? And we did have one question come out about whether the presentation slides will be available after the webcast. I believe they will be, so that you can download them and use them for reference. And if you have any other questions that come up as you review them, you're welcome to email those in. And again, if you have questions or particular issues you want to make sure we cover in today's webcast, please by all means pop those into the question function. I'm sorry? Okay. Caprice is going to make sure those are available.
Yes, I'm going to, the slides will be available on our website by tomorrow, and I'll be also sending out an email with a link to that, and I'll include a PDF of the slides for everyone who attended as well.
Okay, and do we have a survey that goes with that, so they answer questions about what they found useful in the webcast, and did we meet our goals and objectives? And we appreciate if you do participate in that survey, because it helps us maintain our credential, which allows us to provide CPE credits for those of you who attend these webcasts. Okay. Basic principles of revenue recognition, you got to meet all four of them to get revenue. So you need to have your persuasive evidence of an arrangement. You need to have some kind of contract with your customer, the vendor with the customer. Delivery or performance has to have occurred, and the fee needs to be fixed and determinable. And then the receivable from that, or the fee from that transaction needs to be collectible. We've got an easy mnemonic that we use where we say CDEF. It's not ABC, it's CDEF, where C is collectability, D is delivery, E is evidence of the arrangement, and F is the fees fixed in the terminal. And in revenue recognition, both for software transactions and for other transactions that follow the relative selling price method, these four principles are really key, and you need to look in each deal and make sure that you have met the criteria for each one of those items in order to recognize revenue. Software transactions follow the residual method. Under this method, when you've got multiple elements, like a software license and a support or service agreement that's part of the arrangement, you need to defer the full value of any undelivered elements using vendor-specific objective evidence, or VSOE. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then whatever is left over, the remaining value or the residual, is what you allocate to the delivered elements. If we have a license agreement with support and maintenance, we need to know what the value of the support and maintenance is that's provided over the 1 year or more period following the license delivery. We defer the full value of that, and whatever is left over is recognized as the license revenue. Of course, the impact of that is all the discounts go to the delivered items, and the full value is deferred for the undelivered elements. If there's any future issue where the undelivered elements aren't fulfilled, the full value of them is deferred, so you don't get ahead of yourself on the revenue recognition. This residual method, of course, can be very complicated for companies, because if you have items that you haven't delivered yet, you need to have vendor-specific objective evidence, or VSOE, for them. If you don't have VSOE, then your revenue is either going to be recognized ratably. For instance, in the case of a multiple element arrangement that was one license and the support related to that license, you'd end up recognizing the revenue ratably over the support period, typically the 1 year support period. But if you've got other elements that you haven't delivered yet, certain services or additional modules, license upgrades, those sort of things, you might not be able to recognize any revenue until those elements are delivered if you don't have VSOE for them. And typically things like specified upgrades that haven't been created yet and that are never sold separately, it's going to be very difficult to obtain or establish VSOE for those elements. With the residual method, we do need to have VSOE for anything we have not delivered or performed when we deliver the license. So vendor-specific objective evidence, this is the value of an element when we sell it separately. And the contract value may not be the VSOE. In fact, typically it isn't if there's any discount in a deal that has multiple elements and that discount is on any of those elements. The contract value is probably not the VSOE. VSOE is established by analyzing your historical transactions when you sell that element separately. So in a software license transaction with support, you look at what do you sell the support for when you sell it separately. Now, the only time you're going to do that, of course, is when the support is renewed. So if you're selling a software license for $10,000 and you've got $2,000 a year, 20% support and maintenance, if you sell that support for $2,000 in year 2, that would lend credence to the value of that being $2,000 in the initial transaction. Of course, you can't wait a year to find out how much you renew it for in order to do the accounting at the outset of the arrangement. So you need to look to what your business practice is and have a number of historical transactions to analyze in order to establish the VSOE. But typically for support and maintenance, we use the renewal method, the stated renewal method, and the historical renewal method to establish the value of those elements. If those elements are services, we look at what we sell them for when we just sell the services as a standalone arrangement, when we sell training or consulting services. And again, if we don't have VSOE, it's going to result in deferral of revenue, either on a ratable basis or till the last elements are delivered. Discounts are going to be applied to all the delivered elements, and the undelivered elements get the full deferral at VSOE. Software licenses sold with maintenance, that's 2 elements. That's the license and the support. Typically, companies that sell support with their licenses don't sell licenses separately. You'll see most software transactions with support and maintenance sold with them. And so you're typically not going to get VSOE for the software licenses, which can be problematic if you have multiple licenses and you deliver those at different times. Again, if you don't have VSOE for an undelivered element, and one of those undelivered elements is a license, then you're going to be finding yourself in the deferral situation. But as we mentioned, good news is services are, oftentimes are significantly sold independently of the product or of the software license, which allows us to determine the fair value or the VSOE of those services by analyzing them. And if we have a good distribution of them in a narrow range, we can come up with VSOE for them. Similarly with support and maintenance, if we're selling those at a stated renewal rate and it's substantive and it's consistent with our overall maintenance pricing, we can establish VSOE for our support and maintenance. It's really important to clarify all those terms within a contract so that we have clear, comprehensive contracts, and all of our terms are defined and well considered. We don't leave anything out that we need to do the accounting or to get the revenue treatment that we want. So things like being very clear on when the support period starts. So if you're doing ratable recognition, you know when you're starting, or if you're just recognizing ratably the support portion, knowing when that starts and making sure that's consistent with the license period, so you know whether you need to do any carve-outs for any upfront free periods that are associated with the start dates. So some of the general terms, and again, these are basics, but I'm surprised at how oftentimes they're left out of contracts. So basic general terms, what's the contract date? When does it become effective? Because sometimes the signature date is not the effective date of the contract. Sometimes it's effective before or after the signature date. What are the exact prices in the agreement for each one of the elements? What are the payment terms? I've looked at a number of contracts, interestingly, where there's no payment terms stated. So when are you going to collect that fee from the customer if you don't have payment terms stated, 30, 60, 90, whatever days? And if you do have extended payment terms, that can perhaps significantly impact the revenue recognition, because you might find yourself only able to recognize the revenue as those payments become due or they are received. Typically, your software license agreements are going to have significant sections on intellectual property, because generally you're not selling the software license, you're only licensing it for use, and the vendor is going to maintain the property rights in that intellectual property. There's going to be terms that clarify that the customer can't reverse engineer or sell that software, that it's for their own use. Typically there's indemnification that the vendor has not infringed upon intellectual property rights or copyrights of other companies, and protects the customer from that, and provides provisions that protect the vendor in the case that there is a dispute or assertion that there is an intellectual property conflict. Simple things like numbering the pages and making sure that any defined terms, capitalized terms, are defined in one place in one consistent manner. I've seen contracts where a particular term, like a warranty, is defined differently in different sections of the agreement, and that gives you conflicting terms that you have to sort out in order to know what the arrangement terms are that are going to govern the transaction and the accounting for the transaction. License contract terms, you want to make sure you name and spell out the nature of the software. What exactly are the license fees? How those licenses are going to be delivered. Are they delivered electronically, where the vendor sends an email with a URL and a passcode, and that becomes the point in time that the software license is considered available to the customer and therefore delivered. What the term of the license is. Regardless of when you deliver a software license, you're not going to be able to begin recognizing revenue relative to that license until the term begins. So if you deliver a license in April, but the term doesn't start until May, you would not be able to recognize the license revenue until May. And that, of course, provided you meet all the other the requirements. Again, the contract date, the effective date, being clear on any future discounts and future pricing. This can be a very problematic area because if you are in effect front-loading a series of transactions by putting all the discounts at the back end, that may impact your revenue recognition on the front end, that you may need to defer some revenue from the delivered items to cover revenue on the undelivered items or the discounts in future pricing. Whether you've got any future obligations, if you have support obligations, you're going to need to allocate revenue to those. If you've got any upgrades or updates that are part of the transaction, those obligations might become separate revenue elements, which you'd need to have VSOE for in order to recognize the revenue up front. Clear pricing and calculation of the fees, and any specific items relative to discounts, whether you're doing your discounts on the transaction as a whole or if you're discounting specific items within the transaction, that can impact the revenue recognition treatment that you have. In your support contract, what are the exact support fees? What is the term? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 9 months, 18 months? What are the support and start and end dates? You really need clarity on that, and if your license is provided before that, you may need to do carve-outs to cover any free or implied support. What are your support levels? Is it 24/7, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? Is it worldwide or regional? What's the support renewal process? And what's the support renewal pricing? Are you pricing your support as a percentage of the net license fee? And again, what are you discounting in a transaction when you have a discount term? Are you discounting specific items, or are you discounting the entire invoice? The troublesome terms and issues that we come up against when we are trying to do the revenue accounting for software transactions, if we've got any elements without VSOE, either stated in the contract or whether they're implied. So if you have a business practice of providing support, even if it's not in the contract, and you don't have support VSOE, that can certainly significantly impact your item. If you have any new service elements that you're selling in conjunction with the license and support, and you don't have VSOE for those because they're new elements and you haven't established those yet, that can certainly impact you as well. So we really need to be careful. What are the elements that we have? Any specified deliverables, future upgrades, variable pricing, if there's going to be any rebates or credits that might occur, then maybe we have to discount the total fee to accommodate those and reserve for those. Any free items become revenue elements that we need to allocate revenue to, particularly if those free elements are delivered at a time in the future. And then a lot of companies run into problems with concessions where they change the terms of an agreement subsequent to the period that they entered into the contract. Either they provide additional elements or services to the customer, or they change some of the contract terms, the warranties, the payment terms, anything like that that's done without a reciprocal benefit to the company from the customer, either in more fees or less obligations, could be considered a concession and may mean that either your fees aren't fixed and determinable or your evidence of an arrangement isn't really complete on the date that you execute the contract. Let's take another polling question, and I think at least one or comments have come in. I can't really read it on my screen. I'm not quite sure how to change that, so maybe I can look at it on yours. And the third polling question is, what type of software licenses does your company have? Do you have perpetual, term, subscription, combination of the above, or are you not a software company? Maybe you're a SaaS type of company. And then let's see if we can look at the questions that come in. What do you mean by carve out for free or implied support? So what we mean by that is if you sell a software license and you provide 1 year support and maintenance with that, but you don't sell that separately, it's a revenue obligation of the company. You need to allocate revenue to it. A case where you would have implied support is, let's say you deliver a license on January 1st, but the support period doesn't start until February 1st. So it's 1 year from February through January of the next year. In January of the first year, you've given them free or implied support, because when you start supporting them in February, any maintenance releases that came out in January would be available to the customer. So you really don't have a 12-month support period in that scenario. You've got a 13-month support period. So you'd have to allocate some revenue from the software license to that 13th month. And the typical term that folks in the RevRec world use is you carve it out. You allocate from the delivered elements to the undelivered elements for those items. Another time that you would have implied support is if you have a 1 year support period and that support period ends and the customer doesn't renew their support period for, say, 3 months, and they renew it for a 1 year period starting in that third month. Well, those 2 months that they were unsupported would have implied support, because they would kind of get catch-up support in the third month when the renewal started. So you need to be very careful about how you apply your support and whether you have any free support periods or if you have any implied support for periods where they're not contractually supported, but you are supporting them practically. So hopefully that answers that free or implied support question. Let's move on to lapse support. That's an example of just what I was talking about. If you have service levels or other type of penalties in your software contracts or in your support agreements, such that if you're unable to resolve maintenance issues within a certain period of time, and then you need to accommodate the customer by providing them free support or refunds of some kind, you need to look at those service level or penalty commitments and most likely defer revenue for them until those potential penalties or credits go away. If you've got acceptance terms, if you deliver a license to the customer and they've got a 30-day period of time to test the license before they accept it, well, then you wouldn't be able to recognize revenue until that acceptance occurred. And typically a good way to structure those, if you are going to have acceptance terms, is to provide a period of time in which the customer must notify the vendor that they have not accepted. And if that 30-day period, for example, notice period expires, then you can recognize the revenue because there's implied or de facto acceptance at the end of that period. You need to be really careful if you've got complicated agreements with multiple acceptance criteria. You may not be able to recognize revenue until all those acceptances have been received. And if you need positive or written acceptance, sometimes that might be difficult to get before the close of an accounting period, and that could preclude your revenue recognition for those items that have acceptance terms related to them. Any future obligations. Linked contracts are a concept that impact us, and we're going to look at those, some of the terms that might tell us whether we have a linked or independent contract. And then sunset provisions. We're not seeing this so much, but in the past there were certain software companies that would end-of-life products and then introduce new products that had some or all or most of those same functionalities that then require customers to buy new licenses for. And customers, of course, didn't like paying twice for the same software license or same software functionality, so they started to ask for contract provisions that would protect them from those situations, typically by saying if a product was discontinued, the customer would get the new product. Well, that could become a future obligation, so you need to be very careful how those sunset provisions are worded so that you don't impact your initial revenue recognition, because if you've got an obligation, a potential future obligation, you may not be able to recognize revenue until that future obligation is met, and if it's a vague promise sometime in the future, that can become very problematic for revenue recognition. So be very careful with any sunset provisions that you might have. Linked contracts, if you're entering into multiple contracts with a customer in a short period of time, they might be considered one contract for accounting purposes, and that would mean that if one of those two contracts that are considered one accounting contract had an element without VSOE, that might impact your revenue recognition for all the contracts. If one of those contracts isn't complete and signed in the same accounting period as the other contracts, that your evidence of arrangement might not be complete. A good example of this would be a software license sale with support, and then there's also a services agreement with a statement of work that is being negotiated at the same time that's integral to that license. But sometimes those statements of work or sales take longer to negotiate and execute, and if they aren't executed until the subsequent period, maybe you don't have complete arrangement in the initial period, and even though you delivered the license and started the support period, you may be precluded from recognizing the revenue until that SAL is signed. So the typical things that we look for to determine whether a contract is linked with other contracts is, are the negotiations conducted jointly for a single project, but there's two pieces of paper that are two contracts that they are on. A good example of that would be one contract for the license, one contract for the support. Some companies find that their customers buy their licenses from one group and their services or their support from another group, but if they're related, conducted at the same period of time with the same parties, executed on the same day, they're probably really treated as one contract for accounting purposes and not multiple contracts. So you need to look at these various elements. You can look at in section 985, 605, 50, I believe it is, the old TPA 39 elements to see if you're meeting those criteria. If their contracts are negotiated within a short period of time, they might be linked or related. If they're interrelated or independent, you need the elements from both of those contracts to get the functionality or value for the customer, and those contracts are probably linked and should be accounted for as one. If the payment terms in one contract coincide with the performance criteria of another, even if they're not specifically called out, that might lead one to conclude that the two contracts are really linked and should be accounted for as one contract. And one or more elements are essential to the functionality of the other contract. All these things would lead you to conclude that maybe multiple contracts should be accounted for as one contract. When we look at the services that are often offered as conjunction in multiple element arrangements with software licenses, we have different ways of delivering our services. Time and materials typically are the least problematic, although if you've got a time and materials contract in association with a license, you're going to need VSOE for those contract services, either on a daily or hourly basis, in order to defer the revenue for them and recognize the upfront revenue for the license and begin to support revenue recognition. If you've got fixed fee arrangements, you may be finding yourself doing your accounting for the entire arrangement for the software license and any services on either the completed contract or the percentage of completion method, or sometimes the zero margin method. This could be pretty complicated situations, and it's something we spend quite a bit of time on in our revenue recognition for technology companies webcast. If you've got statements of work, making sure that they're very specific. For example, if you think you've got a time and materials contract, do those statements of work clearly spell that out. In particular, what happens if you go over the initial estimates? Do you bill additional fees for that, or do you get change orders for them, or is really what you thought was a time and materials contract a fixed fee contract that has very different accounting under the percentage of completion or completed contract method? Are those services essential to the functionality of the software? If they are, even if their time and materials are independently contracted, they may have to be recognized in conjunction as one accounting contract with the software license. And then there's funded research and development contracts, which typically aren't recognized as revenue at all. This is where typically you'll see that when there's three parties to an arrangement, for example, a vendor who has a software license and a third party who's got a different license or a product wants that vendor to make that software available with the third party's software and will provide funding to help that happen, but that third party doesn't actually purchase anything from the company. They just want the vendor to make those licenses or products available to the general market. Well, then those funds might be accounted for as a reduction of your R&D expense rather than revenue. So you need to certainly be aware of those and how you structure those transactions. You can have two different scenarios on essentially the same operational transaction. If you don't provide any deliverable to the funding party, it may very well be that you've got an offset to your research and development expense, but if you do have a deliverable, it may be possible to structure that same arrangement as a revenue arrangement. So these are things that can be very interesting and problematic, and oftentimes surprising to a company when they are receiving funds from a third party but not recognizing revenue from them, that are in fact recognizing a reduction in their expenses. Coming up on the end of the webcast here, we've got a number of topics that we still want to cover, so we'll look at those. If you've got a multiple element arrangement with software, tangible products, support and maintenance, installation, services, future discounts, each one of those elements needs to be accounted for and have revenue allocated to it. If you've got software with all other elements and they're only software related elements, support, software services, software licenses, you're going to be in the residual method of software revenue recognition. But if you're selling tangible products along with your software, you very well may find yourself working initially with the relative selling price method, getting a subset of the transaction that would be under software rules and the other elements under the relative selling price rules. So you want to follow that. If you've only got software-related elements, you're going to apply the residual method. As we talked about, you're going to have VSOE, any carve-outs for below VSOE items that are undelivered. If you've got tangible elements, you're going to first use the relative selling price method to allocate revenue. And then once you've got the revenue that's allocated to the software element or elements, then you're going to follow software revenue recognition rules. So if you had a product, a license, and support, you may find yourself using the relative selling price method to allocate revenue to those three elements. Then you'd combine the license and support revenue and follow the revenue recognition rules for that, which would mean you would need VSOE for the support in order to recognize the license on delivery. Again, these can be very complicated, and we do spend quite a bit of time in our technology webcast on these. If you've got cloud and SaaS arrangements without software licenses, well, then you're going to treat those as a service, not as a software license. You're going to follow the relative selling price method. You don't have to have VSOE, but you do need estimated selling price, or ESP, which is a much easier value to establish. And I think we'll do our last polling question. We get that up, look and see if we've got any other questions that have come in, and kind of wrap up the webcast. So our question is, how does your company record revenue? Do you automatically defer and then allocate? Or do you recognize on booking and adjust if necessary? Do you manually review each transaction? Or do you have some other way? Does your ERP system or your revenue management software do that for you? And while we're getting the poll results on that, let's see if we've got any other questions that have come in. In a SaaS model, if you have professional services on the front end, that the customer could hire a third party to do, but chose to hire your company to do, and you discount the professional services heavily, so you're losing money on the professional services but making money on the contract as a whole, that is combined 1-year subscription and professional services, what are the accounting considerations you would work through? Well, if you truly had a multiple element arrangement where those professional services have standalone value, you would use the relative selling price method to allocate revenue to each one of those elements, and it may be that if you discounted the professional services which you provided first, they may get revenue allocated to them from the subscription. Then you'd have to look at whether you've got any contingent revenue consideration or revenue caps. For example, if you'd only invoiced for the professional services, that might be the limit of what you can recognize excuse me, for those professional services. If you've got any refund or obligations if you didn't provide the subscription services, it may be difficult to allocate revenue from the subscription services to the professional services. So it's going to be dependent upon a number of factors, but if you are selling services with a SaaS arrangement and those services have standalone value, they would get revenue allocated to them under the relative selling price methodology. I wanted to cover a couple last topic here before we conclude the webcast. One is that the future of revenue recognition and revenue recognition of the future is coming in its new standard from the FASB and the ISB. It has been 15 years in the making, and it's going to be issued imminently. For the last year, they've been saying they're about to issue it, but I think the expectation is it will come out here in the second calendar quarter of 2014. It's going to make significant changes to the basic principles of revenue recognition, so it's going to impact all companies that have revenue, and it's going to be applicable to all revenue contracts. So it's going to you're not going to have one world for software companies and one world for tangible products, entertainment companies, content companies. Everybody that's got different revenue recognition standards is going to all be governed by this new standard that's coming out. And it does become, or currently is expected to be effective in 2017, but it's going to require comparable presentation in the year of adoption. So if you're a public company in 2017, you would need to have 3 years of presentation under that principle, 2015, 2016, and then 2017, the first year of issuance. So it is going to be very complicated to adopt and account for this. Companies are finding that they're going to probably need to be doing the revenue recognition 2 ways in at least 1 or 2 years prior to adoption, particularly if you're a public company and you've got forecasts and expectations and earnings estimates that you've got to be managing. You're going to need to know what those are way ahead of time, or you'll find yourself severely impacted in the year of adoption. So this is a very big topic. There's lots of interest in this, and everybody's really just waiting for the final standard to come out to begin madly scrambling to get ready to implement that in 2 or 3 years, because for one thing, your ERP system may not be able to handle it, and that can be very problematic for you, particularly if you've got to be doing it 2 ways for a period of time. So we covered a lot of things in a short hour. We looked at how we recognize revenue for software transactions under the residual method, what we do with SaaS or services if we're under the relative selling price method. We looked at the various business models for software transactions. Hopefully you found this webcast today beneficial. Again, if you've got any other questions, you're welcome to type them in while we're wrapping up here, or email them to us, and we'll be happy to email a response back and post that on our blog. Do want to highlight our revenue recognition for technology companies webcast, where we go much more into depth into topics like this, and that's coming up in a month, May 13th and 15th, two half-day webcasts. You get 7 hours of CPE credit for that. It's pay per attendance, and registration and details are available soon. We talked through the agenda. There's a number of items that we cover, and again, if you've got any other questions, you can email me. You can download the slides from our website. You can email Caprice here at Tensoft, and come back and visit the blog on the Tensoft Resource Center. Also, this webcast was recorded, so that'll be posted up there, and if you want to attend again, or if you know somebody who might be interested, they can watch the replay. We are not able to provide CPE credits for the archive webcast, but you're welcome to take benefit of those. And thanks very much for joining us today. Do we have any other questions come in? Or let's see, here's one. What if you have acceptance on the services that are provided in relation to the software delivered? For example, you deliver software and sell the implementation services, and they have to accept those. Does that tie up the license revenue if you have VSOE for the service? Well, if those services are essential to the functionality of the software, if the company can't utilize the license, they could very well hang up the license revenue until those services are accepted. If they're independent, maybe they're training services or some additional custom modules that have standalone value, then maybe not. And if you have VSOE for those, you could perhaps recognize those independently. It's going to depend on the facts and circumstances of your situation. So it could be either way. There could be two methods there for you. So again, thanks for your questions. Thanks for joining us today. Look forward to having you join us for the revenue recognition for technology companies, and stay tuned for other complimentary 1-hour webcasts like this one in the future.